Hello, my name is Annabel Harsing, and today we'll be talking about doing a literature review. So then step 7, one of the last steps, evaluating the literature. You have accumulated all of this literature, how to evaluate whether it's actually useful for your thesis or not. That's what we'll go through in step 7. So when you evaluate the literature, first of all, you look at coverage. Does the literature cover what you actually hope it does? So there are 7 criteria that you would look at. First of all, relevance. Is the subject actually relevant to your study? You might have thought it was relevant when you first found the article, but once you've refined your study, you might decide that this is actually not essential, so you put it aside. Then currency, is it up to date? Obviously, you shouldn't just look at articles published in the last couple of years, but if you're looking at an issue that's particularly topical, then it doesn't make sense to have lots of references that are 20 or 30 years old. So is it as up to date as needed for the topic in question? Then reliability. Is the author of the article or is the journal in which the article was published credible? In terms of the author, you might not always know unless you know from your preliminary discussions with your supervisors or other people working in the field that these are key authors in this field. But for journals, you have a bit more guidance because you can assess the quality level of the journal. And the higher the quality level of the journal, the more likely that the article is reliable. So you might have heard of journal impact factors, you might have heard of Schemaco rankings, you might have heard of the ABS, the Association of Business Schools journal ranking list. There are lots of different ways to evaluate the quality of a journal. If you have any questions on this, let me know during the session, but this is really not difficult to find. Then the audience. What is the audience that it is intended for? Is it intended for an academic audience? Is it intended for a practitioner audience? Is it intended for a lay audience? So even for people who know nothing about the field. In most cases, the audience will be academic because you've looked at academic journals, but there are some journals that are what we call bridge journals. So they basically discuss academic work, but they also try to make it accessible to practitioners. In some cases, that means that you do not have enough detail in the article for it to be useful for your studies. But in other cases, it might be very useful as a sort of frame setting for your thesis. But again, it's important to be aware of this, to be aware of what the intended audience of the article is. Then once you've sifted through the articles and books according to these steps, then go through the remaining sets by initially reading all of them. And for the first 4 steps, you don't really need to read the entire article. You can look at the abstracts, the conclusion, when it was published, you look at the journal, the audience, you get a sense of that quite quickly when you look at the methodology section. So you're not actually reading every article from start to finish in the first 4 steps, but in the last 3 steps you do this. So reading the article, do you think it's accurate? Do you think the information in the article is correct? If there are any key facts in the article, try and use other sources to verify these facts. This is what we call triangulation. In addition to that, does it have the level of detail you need? Is the scope significant, sufficient for your study? It doesn't obviously make sense if For instance, you are looking at a particular phenomenon on a worldwide or a European scale, or you look at it for the whole of Asia or Latin America or Africa, and you're dealing with a study that looks at one particular country. The scope of that study might not be broad enough. Although, if you combine it with other studies in the same region for different countries, you might be able to build up a broader picture. Then finally, objectivity. Are different viewpoints taking into account? Academic writing is balanced writing. It's not about arguing a particular point of view. That is more like journalistic or political writing. So you're looking for authors who also signal the limitations of their study, authors that also point to possible alternative interpretations of their findings. This is really hard to do if you're just starting out, but you'll get better at this as you go along. And as you probably have already guessed, points 3 to 7, so reliability, audience, accuracy, scope, and objectivity, are usually implicitly fulfilled if you use academic journals, because we would all expect these factors to be present in academic journals, but be aware that not all journals are equally rigorously reviewed. So if you have lower quality journals, the standards might be much lower, and not all of these issues might have been systematically checked in the review process. So that's evaluating literature in terms of coverage.